Hello my friends, in today's video I will answer probably the most asked question, because while I was working on this Draguana model, I posted the work in progress videos of model creation on my Instagram and social media, and there were a lot of people who particularly asked what's the correct way of creating the scales on the 3D model on the reptile. So in today's video, I will answer this question. Also, I will cover some controversy that I saw in this topic, because there were very few amount of people who gave the feedback of a kind where they said, why do you have to spend so much time on creating those scales the way you are doing? What's the point of it? What's the reason of it? Why you can just use the alpha maps or presets of brushes to create those scales and not spend like months of time on creating this whole model? What's the point of it? It's just waste of time. So when I was thinking about how should I do this video and what are the important things that I need to tell you in this video that will help you in your future work, I went to YouTube and I started looking into other videos, what other creators doing. So 90% or even more of videos regarding the dragon scales creation is focused on the actual thing, on the actual, like the techniques of creating the scales in ZBrush, which is a great thing. It's the right way, it's the right approach to show how those scales should be created technically. But there is so much of those videos already on YouTube, and if I repeat the same information, there will be no value of it. And I want to give you a value. I want to give you the information that will really help you in your future work. So let's get into it. This is the Draguana model that I created. As you can see, it's pretty detailed. All the scales are detailed, and I would say 90% of all these scales are handmade. They are not made using alphas. They are not created using some brush templates. They're mostly created using just masking the areas and then extruding. Of course, it took me a lot of time to create the scales this particular way, but give me a chance to speak why I decided to do so. So when I approached this work and understood that I want to create as much realistic Draguana model as possible, first thing I did, I took hundreds of photos of this reptile. And the purpose of that is to understand how the anatomy and the muscle structure of the creature dictates the position and the size and the hardness of a scale, and the scales as areas, you know. So let's take a look. Very often on Instagram or Behance or ZBrush Central, I see the wonderful models of dragons. But when I start looking into details and I start looking into how those scales are built, it's just, man, it's not gonna work this way. It's not how the things work in nature. First thing you need to do is to think about the reptile skin mainly as a defensive mechanism that was perfected through centuries to the level that it's hard to explain. We can only just look at it and be amazed. So probably the closest analogy I can give you in this case is to look at the mid-century Gothic armor, and let's look at it together. So here I want to focus your attention on not how those plates are built technically. This is an important point. I want you to think right now about the function and the purpose of those pieces in general. Like, think about it from the different perspective, right? Not from the modeler perspective, but from the mechanic perspective. So we just watched this video of this 15th century armor, and I'm really amazed what a masterpiece this armor is, because not only the body parts of the armor are manufactured in an excellent way, but also the engineering thought that goes into the creating of those joints. And this is exactly the point that I want to bring for you as someone who need to work on the dragon scales, because technically speaking, dragon scales is the same thing. It's the armor of the animal. And not only the armor, this armor need to allow this animal to move all its joints in the way that they need to survive. Only reason for those scales to exist on this creature is to survive, to give these creatures genes to the next generation, and those generation need to survive then to the next generation and give those genes further. So let's think about it this way. Reptiles literally perfected the way of protecting themselves. Of course, on the level they are existing, right? So important part here to understand while working on the reptile scales is to understand that there are no accidents in the structure how the scales are located on the body and on the skin. Like, the first thing you need to do is to ask you questions. Why this line of scales is here? Why it's located here? And why it's located this way and not another? So first thing you need to do is to analyze, learn and think. And this process will give you the base to do the further work on your scales, on your dragon scales in ZBrush. For example, like here we have the muscle, triceps muscle that goes this way, right? And we have this muscle that goes here. We have the rib cage that go in here. Also here we have the chest muscles, but also we have the joint, the joint that need to move all the way around. So all those scales are built and placed exactly the way to complement the joints moves. It's the same thing I showed you on those body armors, 15th century body armor, right? The way how those scales are placed on the reptile is the same, is using the same logics. So the places where like its top surface, the scales are bigger. Why are they bigger? They're bigger to have more protection on the sides that are open. Now the areas that are that can be closed by moving the hand closer to the body, they have smaller and more soft scales. And now the area of an armpit, this one, right? It has this baby skin quality of scales. It's like, I've touched the skin. It's so soft and so gentle. It's like a child skin, I'm telling you. So you see, in the distance of 1 inch here, we have the scales that are so huge and so very tiny small. And we can see, by looking at those muscles and this joint, we can understand why are those scales are the way they are here. And we can answer this question by analyzing. And this is the thing that I really recommending you to spend your time on, learning references and understanding how things work in nature and why are they working this way. And by doing this, you will improve the quality of your work tremendously. This is pretty the same thing. Interesting point that I want to make here is I will zoom in to this area. So this creature is breathing, right? And having this hard scale body armor on yourself means that it limits your moves basically, and it limits the way how your body inflates and deflates when breathing. So look how nature worked here. Look what nature did here. It basically broke the patterns of the bigger scales that are protecting the front and the chest side when it goes up, to allow a creature to breathe and inflate. When they're breathing, the body gets bigger, right? It adds this extra stripes, extra lines of smaller scales to allow it to get bigger. This is so interesting when you start getting so deep into the subject. It gives so much information. Isn't it amazing? Like to let the creature breathe nature gives those additional kind of instruments on the skin. Let's move forward. The leg is very interesting, how the scales placed on the leg. Especially I was fascinated by this area where the leg is connecting to the body. The interesting part here is this fold. You can see it here, it goes here, it connects to the leg here, it continues here. So basically this is kind of a half loop of the skin that allows creature to extend his leg to the opposite side. So when the leg goes this way, right, this will create a fold. But if there would be no fold here, creature wouldn't be able to extend the leg this way, the opposite way, all the way to the tail, let's say, right? It would create the unnecessary tension in this area. So what the nature did, the nature created this beautiful one fold here to let the creature move the legs freely. And it complements by the positioning of the scales, because if you take a look here, the scales are going this way. But here, by including, like, if you take a look at this flow of the scales, it's splitting it. It's splitting it, and look what's happening. The scales kind of branching all the way up to here to give this nice fold. When the fold will be created, the scales will come up together nicely without breaking and making a tension between each other. This is so interesting. So I tried to do the same with my 3D model while working on it and creating kind of the same fold here to let the creature basically extend his legs the direction it needs. All purpose of this reference learning process is to make your work at the end more believable and more realistic. While you work on very serious projects, it will really help you. This one is very interesting. This one is one of my favorite. It has so much in it. Not only it has the smaller scales in this area to let the leg bend in this area, but also it has kind of a smaller scales areas that go this way, so the palm can also be bended kind of sideways, and I'll show you the photos of it later. But one more interesting part here is these scales in particular. This is such a stunning element. So why would nature put the scales of a bigger size in that area? And without learning the behavior of the animal and without watching a lot of videos of this animal in action, it would be impossible to understand. But the purpose of these particular scales, it's not basically a scales, it's a claws. It's a scales that starting here and closer to this area, they already start looking more like a claws, like a nails, right? And the reason for that is usually those creatures like iguanas, they're climbing up, and there is a gravity, and gravity usually drags the objects down, right? When the creature climbs up, these claws, they kind of extend this way, they kind of open themselves and go into the wood, like stuck into the wood, and doesn't let the creature slide down from the tree or some other surface. This is so interesting. Like, guys, I'm telling you, it's a whole universe of new knowledge when you dive deep in the subjects like this. So pretty the same thing goes for the dwelp. You can see here how the scales are different depending of how the structures bend, and the purpose of this dwelp is kind of regulate the temperature of the creature. When they need to cool themselves off, they are extending it and letting the heat go out. You can take a look how rich this area is with vessels. That's the blood, basically, the blood flow that can go through this area and exchange the temperature. So, as I said, the only purpose of this body armor to exist is to help the animals survive. When we look at this photo, we immediately understand what is the purpose of those circular scales on the neck. It's a little bit hard to understand just looking at the photo. But when you're really touching those things, they're circular, and then they have this spike on top. And this spike is really sharp. It's like a tooth. So usually what's happened is that larger animals and predators trying to grab their prey here on the neck or head, right? To not allow the creature to bite them in response. So what they do, they usually grab the creature here on the neck. And this is the defensive mechanism against that. So if some predator will bite the iguana from top, those spikes will hit the predator. And like understanding this, why they are there, we can create those spikes on our 3D model the right way, how the nature designed them. And also when you will work on some fantasy creature, it will give you so much understanding. You'll not just throw things on the wall and see what sticks, right? And see what looks good or what looks not good. It's not the way how you should approach your modeling process of a dragon. You should approach modeling a dragon as something that could potentially exist in nature, right? Imagine you have all those knowledge and understanding why a scales on this position and what's their purpose. It will allow you to build so much more realistic creatures. And that's my goal, you know, to help you understand those things. Yeah, this is again about those claws scales on the leg that I told you before, where the creature is climbing up and it kind of extends them, opens them up, and pushes them into the wood to help stay on the place without sliding down. This is so interesting. Look, it's not a scales, it's a scales that slowly are converting to actual nails. Now, the scales on the head. Again, we can do the same analysis and the same process of thinking while we are creating the scales on the dragons or fantastic dragon. First thing we need to do, why are we placing this scale here and not another? What's the purpose, what's the mechanic, and what's the overall structure and need of those elements in this particular place? For example, the head of the iguana. Why is this large circular shield is located in this area? There are two purposes for this. First is all this area is filled with fat. And during winter, these creatures are lowering their appetite and basically living whole winter to the next summer on their savings, right? On their fat savings. But the second purpose is that this is albino iguana, and you cannot really speak about the coloration subject here, but like if the iguana is not albino, it will have black overline around this circular shield. And the purpose of this, if the predator will attack, again, it's so fascinating to think that every piece of this creature's body armor, the only purpose is to help it survive. When the predator will try to attack, they usually trying to hitting the most viable places and areas, its eyes, so the prey without the ability to see will not be able to escape. The predator will hit this circular shield instead of the eye, thinking that is the eye. Because iguanas, when something approaches them, they tend to close their eyes. The predator will hit this thing instead of hitting the eye, which will allow iguana to run away or to fight or to escape. One more thing, the tail. Another defensive mechanism for reptiles, for dragons, for iguanas, whatever. If you take a closer look here, you will see that like the positioning of the scales on the tail, it's not whole. It's kind of broken on the segments that are repeating themselves. Segments are placed kind of equally throughout the whole tail. And the scales are going kind of this way. What's the purpose of this? Why nature decided to do so? Nature never decides something out of nowhere. There is always a reason for nature to do the things certain ways. So the reason behind the placing scales this particular way on the tail is that, as you know, reptiles and lizards, most of them, not all of them, but the most of them have the ability to release the parts of the tail if the tail is being grabbed by the predator. To be able to do so, the muscles inside the tail should be positioned the certain way. And the muscles in the iguana tail are located to complement that mechanism of self-defense. And they are located in kind of sectors. You can think of it as some kind of a matrix structure that can, or spaceship that can close the segments of its structure to isolate some areas. Sphincters in our body, right? Circular shape that can contract themselves and kind of hold this circle really tight. So those muscles along these segments are not exactly sphincters, but their purpose and their structure is very close to them. And they're placed all the way through the whole tail. So any part of this tail can be basically disconnected. And when they need to kind of close to avoid the bleeding while the tail is broken, they kind of contract here and here if the tail is broken. It's interesting. The tail of the reptile will not break here. It will happen right in the middle of this, like in the connection of this sphincter muscles. It's not gonna break here. It will break here. Those muscles can contract and kind of isolate the blood flow, closing the damaged hole and keeping everything inside, you know. Isn't it interesting, like how we came to this? We came to this just by asking ourselves a question: why are the scales located like they are located on these patterns on the tail? And we went all the way through thinking from anatomy, understanding why it's there. And now when you will work on the reptile tail, you will implement this knowledge and you will implement the same techniques. Because right now, after learning this, as an artist, you will not be able to disregard this and make some kind of random tail scales. You will make the tail of your 3D reptile based on the knowledge that you received, right? And that's how it works. That's how it should work. Now I want to speak with you a little bit about the process, how I implemented that knowledge into my 3D work. So let's get into it. First of all, I 3D modeled the overall shape, and then when it came to the scales modeling, just using the mask instrument, went through the scales on the head based on references and kind of went into detailing them. Here is the next part of work on those scales. You can see how I approached the modeling process step by step, little step by little step. But main thing, I wanted to make sure that all scales are on their rightful place, and this place is justified by nature and by its purpose. On this video, you can see how I approached the scales on the dwelp. Now, could I use the alpha map here? Of course I could. Of course I could just use apply the alpha map and just fill this the surface with the scales. But I wanted to make something that is truthful to nature and more believable and more right in terms of mechanics and anatomy. And that's why I mapped out how those scales should be located. And then I filled them with mask, and then I extruded them. And this is the result. Looks good, right? And it's not only looking good, it's an important thing. It's not only looking good, it also looks correct from the anatomy standpoint. So when it came to the scales on the body, it's the same thing as in pencil drawing. What you do first, you kind of looking for shapes, for the main kind of lines, for the main directions, vectors. You're trying to find the overall shape, and then you go into details. Pretty the same I did here, but with the masking instrument, where I was trying to understand how the things work, where are the flows of those scales, where are they bending, where they are not bending, what areas of the skin should be protected by the scales, what areas of the skin can be folded. And it's not the actual scales, it's just the masking. And then I filled this mask with color, and then I went in modeling like on top, like the next layer, right? But here I'm just defining the positioning of those scales to make it believable and to make it correct from the nature standpoint. Like we saw here on the references, we spoke about this armpit area. In this video, I'm showing how I'm going really into details with the shoulder area. As you can see, I'm not only defining the overall directions for the scales on the folds, but I also in the color, like this is the masking, but also in color, helping myself by drawing the directions of the muscles, like how the muscles located under the skin. This is the one direction, right? And the second layer that goes on top is the location of the scales on the skin. So those are two things that I was basing my scale placement process on. Yeah, you can clearly see here that there is a muscle direction and there is a folds direction, skin direction, right? Same goes for the body. So first I define the muscle location using the anatomy books and photos and references. I define where are those muscles, and then on top of that I kind of drawing the smaller elements, and then on top I will draw the flow of the scales, and I will work on top of those areas with a brush. Here we go. On the back of the reptile, the scales are pretty linear, but also they have these vectors where the vessels are going, big vessels are going under the skin. So those scales interestingly following the shape of those vessels. And all this craziness is made by hand masking. No alphas are used here, as you can see. It's all clear analysis, deep analysis, and learning the subject, and just the attempt to repeat the nature at its best. Wing armpit location, you see, this is the example of where I'm using the techniques and knowledge I learned from the photos. Obviously, iguana doesn't have wings, right? But I'm using that knowledge and transferring that knowledge to create something new and to work on something completely new, like wings. And I'm implementing that knowledge on the new things, on the things that are not existing in nature. And that's how you can really grow as an artist and as a professional. Exactly same goes for the legs. I'm trying to mimic the patterns of muscles and skin on the leg, and trying to understand how the scales and what's the size of the scales on the legs, and then transferring that into these drawings. And then based on drawings, I'm making the scale placement and positional rough, and then making the second kind of layer where I'm detailing them. Here is a good example where I'm basing my scales location on the certain vectors, and the purpose of this is basically to let the reptile to bend and move their legs and hands freely. You can see that here the scales are smaller, here they are bigger, on this area they are bigger, and they will be way bigger on the frontal side of the leg, because that leg is constantly open to nature and to predators, to anyone. Well, these areas here can be closed, and they have to have ability to fold well, right? All right, this looks cool. This looks good. So on this point, I did the scales with a mask. I extruded them. And now on this stage, I subdivided the model one more time, and now I'm going through all the scales, making them more detailed. I'm basically sculpting each scale and giving the scales a more polished look, more correct look from the, because you can see here the scales are kind of blurred out and smoothed out, but I'm going by hand through every scale and kind of sculpting it to look more like a scale. And you can see it was before, and this is after. And I went through the whole body doing this, like whole body, each scale. The same thing for the wing hands, where I'm going into detailing the scales. This is after. So all scales are kind of being improved on the second level of subdivision. The same thing I did with the whole body. After the second subdivision, I went through whole body. I detailed all the little parts and little segments and little scales. Like you can clearly see here, this is how it was before the detailing, like the first level, right? And this is after detailing, where I went through all elements and sculpted every piece of it. And this video is basically a result of all modeling work that I did on the model. It's a result of all learning that I did from the references and thinking the references through and implementing my knowledge on this exact creature. So this is the result that I end up with. The level of detail and everything you can see here looks pretty cool. So, concluding this video and answering the questions, could this work be done faster in a more efficient way? Of course, I could just use alphas on certain areas and just filling the area without giving a second thought, you know? But in my work, I try to come close to nature as much as possible to make the things as realistic as possible and as truthful to nature purpose as possible. And as a huge thank you to all my art community, if not your help, this project would probably not happen on the level it's happening right now. I want to share with you for free all those 500 plus references of the reptile with all those skin details that the reptile has, so you can learn it, you can probably use it in your future work. So this is the reference folder that I have. I have here like only the back legs. I have here the belly. I have here the eye, reptile eye. It's a completely different world, by the way. I have here the whelp, how the whelp works. I have even the video of how the whelp folding works, so it can give you the idea how it should be animated, right? Yeah, all photos are high resolution. Mouth, for example, nails, tail separately. All those photos are available to download for free. You need to go to draguanandme.com. You go to movie project, and here you scroll all the way down to the bottom. And here you'll find the link Iguana reference pack for artists. This is the link. In this link you will be able to download all those reference photos that I did by myself. So thank you guys, thank you for all your support with this project. I really appreciate your kind words, your belief in my thing. I put a lot of my hope in this film. Thankful to all who are supporting this short film project on Patreon and on Instagram sponsor subscription. I am thankful to Maxon for the sponsorship of my film. Thank you all. I hope with this information and with this long video I was able to give you something new, mainly things to think about, to consider when you will approach this work in future. Have a great day, stay creative, good luck.